On video?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, this is Genesis 5, is where we're starting. And my study Bible had an interesting, we're going to talk just a second about 4, and it said a key verse in chapter 4 referring to Cain was 4 verse 7. And it said, this is God talking to Cain, that you will be accepted if you do what is right. But if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master. And I don't remember Jim touching much on that verse last week. But I thought that was really interesting because don't we struggle with the same thing? Sin is crouching at our door every day. And the devil wants to control us, and we have to subdue it and be its master. And I thought that was really an interesting point. And definitely each one of us would be, will be accepted if we do what is right. Unfortunately, we can't always do what is right, and that's where Jesus came to the rescue, because it's only through Jesus that we are reunited and acceptable to God. So, starting then in chapter 5. This is one of those interesting ones. I know how most of us read these genealogies. We look at the first one, and we skim down until they end, and we say, yeah, that was a nice genealogy. Everybody's smiling because they do the same thing.
Yeah.
Yes, I know. Okay, so we're going to read it, every word. All right. So this is the written account of the descendants of Adam. When God created human beings, he made them to be like himself. He created them male and female, and he blessed them and called them human. When Adam was 130 years old, he became the father of a son who was just like him. In his very image, he named his son Seth. Now we might stop and think, this is actually Adam's third child, because you had Cain and Abel. And Cain was basically disowned when he killed Abel. And Abel was the one who had the relationship with God. Cain was just like, oh, flippant. Oh, I need to give an offering to God. Well, here. I thought it was interesting that there's no mention of any prior children in that. He was the father of a son who was just like him in his very image. He named his son Seth. What is that telling us? What do you think? Well, if he made this son in his own image, whose image is Adam? God's image. I thought that was kind of interesting too, that it was in his very image, which means that since Adam was made in God's image, Seth is made in God's image. And he called his son Seth. After the birth of Seth, Adam lived another 800 years, and he had sons and daughters. Adam lived 930 years, then he died. When Seth was 105 years old, and you can see this on the little chart, when Seth was 105, he became the father of Enosh. After the birth of Enosh, Seth lived another 807 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Let's see. Seth lived another 807 years. He had other sons and daughters. Seth lived 912 years, then he died. When Enosh was 90 years old, he became the father of Kenan. After the birth of Kenan, I don't think Kenan is on our chart. Some of these aren't on there. After the birth of Kenan, Enosh lived another 815 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Enosh, and this is not, Enosh lived 905 years, then he died. When Kenan was 70 years old, he became the father of Mahalalel. After the birth of Mahalalel, Kenan lived another 840 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Kenan lived 910 years, and then he died. When Mahalalel, and I think there's other names, well, Mahalalel, okay. When Mahalalel was 65, he became the father of Jared. That's on our chart.
Okay, so Kenan is on there, but spelled differently.
Yes, I'm thinking.
Canaan.
Yeah. And I think Enosh, I have it in my Bible, is E-N-O-S-H, and here it's just E-N-O-S. So it's the same people.
Yeah.
When
Jared.
Kenan lived 910 years and then he died. When Mahalalel was 65 years old, he became the father of Jared. After the birth of Jared, Mahalalel lived another 830 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Mahalalel lived 895 years, and then he died. They're pretty specific, it's just, he died. When Jared was 162 years old, he became the father of Enoch. After the birth of Enoch, Jared lived another 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Jared lived 962 years, and then he died. When Enoch was 65, he became the father of Methuselah. After the birth of Methuselah, Enoch lived in close fellowship with God for another 300 years. He had other sons and daughters. Enoch lived 365 years, walking in close fellowship with God. Then one day, he disappeared because God took him. Are you using New King James, Jim?
Mm-hmm.
Does it say anything remarkably different? Or does one of you have a translation that's remarkably different?
Mine says,
And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him.
He was
Same
not.
thing.
He disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
He just disappeared.
I think this is the King James, and it says that he walked with God 300 years.
Another 300 years.
but doesn't say he took them.
Verse 24 is where he disappeared or God
Mhm.
took him.
Well, yeah, he walked with God, and he was not, for God took him.
Mm-hmm.
When Methuselah was 187 years old, he became the father of Lamech. After the birth of Lamech, Methuselah lived another 782 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Methuselah lived 969 years, and then he died. When Lamech was 182 years old, he became the father of a son. Lamech named his son Noah, for he said, "May he bring us relief from our work and the painful labor of farming this ground that the Lord has cursed." After the birth of Noah, Lamech lived another 595 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Lamech lived 777 years, and then he died. After Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So, that completes chapter 5.
So what does it say in your study Bible about why Lamech was just taken up?
Why Enoch?
Why Enoch was just taken
It
up?
just basically, it pretty much tells us he walked with God. And it doesn't really say any, okay, Enoch was, at first glance, it looks as if Enoch fared worse than the other patriarchs. He lived on earth only 365 years. You
But
notice
it
all
sounds like he was closer to God than any of the others.
Yeah.
Hebrews 11:5 explains what Genesis 5:24 means. Enoch was taken directly to heaven without seeing death. Enoch then lived longer than any of the other patriarchs, for he never died at all.
In this study Bible, it says, only Enoch and Elijah were taken by God without experiencing death. This was both a testimony of Enoch's deep faith in God and a strong rendering at the beginning of biblical history that for God's people there is life in God's presence after our physical bodies have died.
So that's a very interesting point. I found that this little chart, if you look at when Adam died and come down, Adam was still alive after Lamech was born. That many generations. And if you go to Seth, it almost looks like Seth and Noah almost overlap. Almost. Very close. So, we think it's wonderful when we have 3 or 4 generations still living. Here they had many more generations still living. The other comment that I thought was interesting, there's always debate about, are these really real years? Does it matter? If God made the earth, if you want to think that God created the earth in a linear day, 24 hours, and creation happened in a linear day, then why couldn't he have had people live 969 years? They didn't have more than likely there was not, through Adam and through Seth, because Seth was the godly line, there weren't maybe that much, there wasn't maybe that much sin, because although the only one that really he specifically says walked close with God was Enoch. But we also know that Noah walked with God. So more than likely some of these also did. It's just not as close as, say, Enoch and Noah. The other thing was about the genealogy. And since we all concur that we just love genealogies, I thought I would share this comment. One of the things that the Hebrew word translated became the father of could refer not only to a son, but also to a more distant descendant. And when we're looking at the genealogy of Jesus, it may have skipped generations in the names that it lists. I don't think any names are skipped necessarily here. It just doesn't name the other sons and daughters. It picks out, and as you noted, as you read a lot of the genealogies, it's almost like it gives you several names, but then it zeroes in on one and carries that one. It's kind of like when you get to Abraham, the promise is through Jacob. So everything, you have your genealogy and it kind of skips the one and goes to the other. And then Jacob, you have the genealogy through what's the next son? I've forgotten. But it only picks up the one that we carry the promise through. So the others are just, they're may be mentioned, but we don't hear much about them later. Or if we do hear, many times they've become a country or a nation state that is in opposition to the promised family. So anyway, why are genealogies included in the Bible? The Hebrew people passed on their beliefs through oral tradition. For many years, in many places, writing was primitive or non-existent, and we know at this stage there was no writing. It was stories. Stories were told to children who passed them on to their children. Genealogies have a skeletal outline that help people remember the stories. For centuries, these genealogies were added to and passed down from family to family. Even more important, this is what I highlighted, even more important than preserving family tradition, genealogies were included in the Bible to confirm God's promise that the coming Messiah, Jesus Christ, would be born into the line of Abraham. Genealogies also point out that people are important to God as individuals. Why? Because they're named. God refers to people by name, mentioning their lifespans, their descendants. The next time you feel overwhelmed in a vast crowd, remember that the focus of God's attention and love is on the individual and on you. Each person is a valuable and unique creation to God. And I think it was Jim last week even mentioned that in DNA, that everyone living has one common DNA particle. So, which, if we believe, for those of us that believe the Bible, that means that all of us are descendants of Adam.
And Noah.
Well, yes, it have to be Noah too, because they wiped it all out. But Noah is a descendant of Adam.
So it's both.
Is both. Anything else you think you'd like to comment on chapter 5, 6, whatever, 5?
And besides Seth, all of the others listed their firstborn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
besides Seth, because he
yeah,
is the...
it insinuates
Right.
that it's their firstborn. And in a sense for Adam, because Cain was first. Wasn't Cain burned first or second?
Second.
Second. So Abel was firstborn, but he was killed. Cain was cast
banished.
out. And you know, I know when you think about some terrible family dynamics that happen, sometimes with sexual problems, and you see that individual in the family is basically disowned, disavowed. The family has nothing to do with them. We're seeing that from the very beginning. Basically, Adam didn't even remember he had another son. Seth became his firstborn.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we do it today. Adam did it then. Family dynamics are not always very pretty. Okay, so the flood, or the beginning of the flood. There's going to be some things in the first 4 verses that are controversial. I do not have the answers. I have an iPad that gave me some comments. So let's do verses 1 through 4. Then the people began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw the beautiful women and took any they wanted as their wives. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not put up with humans for such a long time, for they are only mortal flesh. In the future, their normal lifespan will be no more than 120 years. Actually, and then verse 4. It's almost like those three verses kind of go together, although the third verse kind of just is stuck in there. In those days, and for some time after, giant Nephilites lived on the earth. For whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors of ancient times. If you've read Genesis before, you've read those verses. And it's confusing. The best comment I read was, whoever the sons of God were and whoever the Nephilim was doesn't affect the overall picture and story of the Bible. Don't get all bent out of shape that you don't understand verses 1 through 4 of chapter 6. Because the only place in the Bible that the term sons of God, and do you have the same term in other translations? In verse 2.
Just that the sons of God
The
saw the
sons of
daughters
God.
of men.
Okay. This is the only two verses, verse 2 and verse 4, is the only two references to sons of God. If it was something really important, I think God would have mentioned it again. Nephilim. The Nephilim are actually only mentioned twice. Once in verse 4, and the other time is Numbers 13 verses 32 and 33. And that, in Numbers, I'll read, it says, the land, so this would still be part of the Exodus. The land we have gone through as spies is a land that devours the inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great size. So this is when Moses sent the 12 spies into the promised land. We saw the Nephilim, the Anakites, come, and in parentheses I have the Anakites come from the Nephilim. So that is the other reference to giants.
So those are the giants that Joshua
Encountered.
encountered.
But these people that were extremely tall,
Mm-hmm.
bigger. And then again, when you have David and Goliath, Goliath was supposed to be a very tall person. Are you finding anything else on your phone, Jamie, or are you looking at something else?
No, I was looking at that.
Something
but
else? Okay.
No, the same thing.
Okay. And I don't think my pictures are synced here, and I can't open the phone because it's being utilized. But
This study Bible says, some believe that the sons of God were the men of the righteous line of
Satan?
Seth,
Seth.
while the daughters of men were Cain's offspring.
Yeah. And that's very possible.
I have a note at the bottom of mine talking about supernatural beings, literally sons of God. Let me see where is it coming up from? Where's the footnote? Well,
I was hoping to be able to pull up a picture. There it is. It's the one exactly one I wanted.
it says sons of God used here in the sense of his created supernatural beings, but no longer godly in character. Oh, it says verse 3 in 6. Yeah, my spirit must not. Nope, that's not it. Oh, it's in chapter 7, so we're not to that point.
This is a picture. Now I know I'm short. I understand, but the if you want to pass that around, this is the Nuer tribe from South Sudan. They are very tall. He had to have been 7'5". Is it still open?
Mm-hmm.
He was, and he wasn't the only one.
Yeah.
I had a picture of others that there was a group, and there were others that were almost as tall as him. I don't know, I'm short, but he was almost 36 inches taller than me. So, have there always been tall people? Yes, genetically there are some. This tribe was genetically inclined to be tall. Diet, we know, has a big effect on height. So those who lived in the desert might not have eaten really well and might be shorter. And 75, 80 years ago, I mean, you only have to go into some of the old houses. Linda, I know, knows that.
Yeah.
Jamie does, she lives in one. The kitchen cabinet is
Yeah.
low. It's perfect for me. I don't know what everybody complains about, but I wish mine was that low.
But like in Europe, the doorposts are lower.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you go into these really old castles and
And you
things
have
like
to
that,
do-
and the beds
Rick
are
had,
shorter.
Rick had to duck, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always heard that
So,
the height came when the food got better.
when the food got better.
Yeah.
And I would have thought that the Israelites in 400 years in Goshen, which was a very lush place, would have had a better diet. But we don't know. And it might take more than 400 years to change their size.
And somewhere along the way, the ages
Got shorter.
that people lived got
Got
shorter and shorter too.
Because when you get down to Abraham,
Yeah.
I skipped Isaac, that was my problem, and I couldn't remember the other patriarch.
But we're down to 180, 175 years.
Yeah,
Well, it
Which
said
is
that
still
they
way
were-
too long for us.
Right, well, it said that they were only gonna live 120
20
years.
and as you get to Joseph, I think, was less. So as you get on down into the genealogy that we don't have here, they do get closer to 120. And so, back to verse 1, or verse 4. So, we don't really know who the sons of God were. Maybe they were. The women, the beautiful women, could have been Cain's offspring. It kind of, to me, insinuates that the sons of God weren't the godly people. The way I read it, when they're kind of put in verse 4, whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they give birth to children who became heroes and famous warriors of ancient times. So, were those godly people or ungodly? I don't know. Maybe these were the rulers, the upper class in society. The Bible just doesn't tell us. And again, we're translating from the ancient Hebrew into Greek, into this, maybe another anyway, it's, it just doesn't tell us. So, let's continue with verse 5. Well, what we can do is we can get Jim to explain that next week. We can save that question for him. The Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on the earth, and he saw that everything they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. So the Lord was sorry he had ever made them and put them on the earth. It broke his heart. And the Lord said, I will wipe this human race I have created from the face of the earth. Yes, and I will destroy every living thing, all the people, the largest animals, the small animals that scurry along the ground, and even the birds of the sky. I'm sorry I ever made them. Afterthought, verse 8. But Noah found favor with the Lord.
It's kind of funny that right after they're saying that, you know, in verse 4, they're talking about the women gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors. And then right after that, they talk about all the wickedness.
Wickedness. So that, you know, the John's commentary, and I read that either in here or in an online commentary, that there was thought that, I mean, Cain was out there having children. We know of them because we read about them in chapter 3, and how one of his sons bragged about killing a man, and if he had killed that person, and Cain killed his brother and was cursed, he had killed somebody and he would be cursed 7 times, and he was kind of like bragging about it. So there was a lot of evil that came through Cain.
Well, in that same verse in my version, those were, and then the mighty men of who were of old. Both of those words were are italic.
So your verse reads, they gave birth to children who were the heroes and famous warriors.
They were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Were both times, and children are italic. It doesn't give me a footnote.
I don't know if that, I mean, I
Well,
don't
throughout the rest, I mean,
really, is pretty,
there's hardly any, but it does, every time that it's talking about the evil or the wickedness that is happening, there's several times that those words are italicized. I don't know why.
you know, in verse, commentary on verse 6 to 8, it says, the people's sin grieved God, much like it does today, much like it did during the Exodus, because God came, if Moses hadn't begged, God was ready to do it again. He came that close to getting rid of his promised people. The people's sin grieved God. Our sin break God's heart as much as sin did in Noah's day. Noah, however, pleased God, although he was far from perfect, as we're going to see after the flood. We can follow Noah's example and find favor with the Lord in spite of the sin that surrounds us. And I don't think God regretted creating the earth and regretted creating humans. He's just disappointed. Kind of like a parent when their children do something so heinous that they just can't forgive them anymore.
Well, you know, if you go back to this verse at the beginning in like 3 and 4, it's not it's like not the Noah's or all the offspring themselves that are, well, then they had to accept these evil beings, but it's the evil beings from the spirit world that got involved with them and like corrupted them, right? Because in those days and even afterwards, when the evil beings from the spirit world were sexually involved with human women, their children became giants, and of whom so many legends are told. And so those are the ones that seem like became the wicked people.
So it's actually, instead of using sons of God, it's using evil beings.
Yeah.
And I know yours is more of a paraphrase.
Yeah.
Which version are you reading from?
This is the Living Bible. Paraphrase.
Paraphrase.
Totally. And then down at the bottom it says literally sons of God, used here in the sense of his created supernatural beings, but no longer godly in character. Some commentators believe that the expression sons of God refers to the godly line of Seth, which she said, and the daughters of men to the men of the line of Cain. So they're taking it a little bit different and saying that
But
that it was
I think,
Well, these people are evil, and you're, you know,
yeah.
this
They came
leads-
from somewhere, I guess.
Yeah.
There had to be somewhere that it came from.
Well, they must have been evil because they're talking about them. These sons of God
Mhm.
must have been evil because
Right.
right after that in verse 5, he's
it's when
talking about
we're gonna shorten these years.
Yes.
We don't need them living
there's
thousands.
wickedness on the earth. So these
And
sons
it
of
seemed
God
to have
have been
happened
evil.
In a sense, I mean, we're talking about, you know, Methuselah, there was no problem. And Enoch, we're only a few generations back. Several hundred years. But
Which was a blink of the eye to
yes,
those people back then.
it's a blink of the eye to God, but we think it's a long time. But yeah,
Giving, you know, it says that they gave him 120 years to mend his ways. That's a long time. That's more than our lifetime now. So.
although there was a lady just a few weeks ago that died. Was she from Japan?
I think so.
Yeah, we talked about
Yeah.
that.
It was 122.
Yeah.
So this, starting in verse 9, this is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless person living on earth at the time, and he walked in close fellowship with God. Noah was the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, isn't this an interesting story? We've had this story. We've talked about Cain and Abel and the death. We've gone through this genealogy. And, you know, these are stories told to the children. The children learn them so that as adults they can continue to tell these stories. And this is the account of Noah, and he's the only blameless person living on earth at the time. You know, I think as children we'd be telling that, you know, they're trying to make it to where, you know, it's a story for children to retell. It just caught me. And he was the sons of 3. He had 3 sons, and this is the first time we've mentioned 3. Because only before we only had 1. But as time will tell, the promise only comes through 1. Okay? Now God saw that the earth had become corrupt and was filled with violence. God observed all this corruption in the world, for everyone on the earth was corrupt. So God said to Noah, I have decided to destroy all living creatures, for they have filled the earth with violence. Yes, I will wipe them all out along with the earth. Exclamation point. And then he starts giving his instructions to Noah. God says, build a large boat from cypress wood and waterproof it with tar inside and out. Then construct decks and stalls throughout its interior. Make the boat 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. Leave an 18-inch opening below the roof all the way around the boat. Put the door on the side and build 3 decks inside the boat, lower, middle, and upper. Look, I'm about to cover the earth with a flood that will destroy every living thing that breathes. Everything on earth will die, but I will confirm my covenant with you. There's something a little strange about this flood. It's never said that they had rain. The way the ground had been watered in the beginning, now whether or not by this point they were having rain, is springs came up from the ground in Genesis 1 and 2. So
This is a lot
But
of
there were
years.
rivers.
there were rivers
There were this is a lot of years since
since.
Adam was made. A lot of years. This is 900 years, 900 years, 900 years. So surely, you would think. They just didn't talk about rain.
The boat, which we'll read on as we read about the boat. Let me just tell you this. The boat was the length of 1.5 football fields and as high as a 4-story building. The boat was exactly 6 times longer than it was wide, the same ratio used by modern shipbuilders. The huge boat was probably built miles from any body of water by only a few faithful men who believed God's promise and obeyed his commands. So, God says he's going, in verse 18, but I will confirm my covenant with you. So enter the boat, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring a pair of every kind of animal, a male and a female, into the boat with you to keep them alive during the flood. Pairs of every kind of bird and every kind of animal and every kind of small animal that scurries along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. Ooh, interesting. The animals are going to come to Noah. Do we have something similar in King James or New King James?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The-
It says, go ahead.
In every creeping thing on earth, after its kind, 2 of every kind will come to you to keep them alive.
So God is going to send the animals. Noah doesn't have to go out and get them. God sends them. And be sure to take on board enough food for your family and for all the animals. So Noah did everything exactly as God had commanded him. Harry and I were blessed to go to the Ark Museum in Tennessee. None of you have been here. You really should make a plan to go. There's the same man built 2 museums. They're about 20 miles apart. One is the Ark, the other is the Creation Museum. The Creation Museum has a lot of reading. You could spend 2 or 3 days there. Harry got frustrated there. He didn't want a scooter. And he went in, he had to go to the bathroom, and we didn't know they had 2 doors. And it's kind of like one went, here was the restroom, well, one door, he went in that door, but then there was that door, and he got confused and went out the other door into a different hall. And I didn't know why he wasn't coming out, and he got really scared because he couldn't find me. So we didn't stay much longer. But that one had a lot of reading, very interesting. And this man is actually from Australia, and I can't remember his name, that has built both of these himself.
When you say a lot of reading,
Well, there's, the museum it's large, and it starts from creation, and it talks about, talks about gestation for, the development of a
You
baby.
stop at each station.
you have all
Each
these
station
stations,
has
and
readings for
There's
it.
lots of them. It's big.
Mm.
But we got pretty much through all of that. When we got to the Ark, I insisted that we spend the money on a scooter, so that he wouldn't have to walk, because they had ramps.
Take more time.
It was easy. But it's built. It's built to scale. It's huge. It has 3 decks. And, you know, they set up cubicles like you would have the giraffes here. And they maybe had some stuff, animals fashioned as giraffes. You had monkeys in this cage, and you had wild boar or hogs in this one. And then they had the areas where the food could have been, that they could have stored food in. And the way the roof is built so that there was the opening up at the top for the birds to go out. So it's phenomenal. Phenomenal.
What, and it's in
Kentucky. You fly into Cincinnati, and we stayed in Cincinnati
Okay.
and drove to,
So it's on the northern side of Kentucky?
yes. And only about a 30-minute drive, and the other one's maybe a 40-minute drive. They weren't far. And I don't remember there being much city around them. So staying where we were was a better place. And it's well worth the trip. And especially if you've read Genesis and, to see what it's like. Your grandson would love it. So, I think we're going to stop and unless you have some questions about what we've read here in 6.
Thank you for this.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
Really.
it's interesting.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes for me to put words
Well, and
into.
it just goes on, and you just and it's that genealogy, and y'all smiled at me when I said, y'all read those really good, don't you? And I got all these nice smiles back, like, I read the first word, I can skip, I'm gonna go through this chapter really quick. Boom, I read a whole chapter, and it's been 2 seconds. It was the whole genealogy, and when you get into Numbers, you have lots of them. But all through the Bible are genealogies. And they're there, they were there for a purpose, not for us to say, I can read that fast. In this case, it's very, it's important to see how they all fit together. And to me, it's so interesting to know that, how influential even Methuselah would have been with Noah, and I have trouble. It only mentions Shem, but Methuselah was living when Shem, and then Shem's son, Methuselah had died. But for Noah and Shem, Methuselah and Lamech were still living. So that would
But
have
they
been.
didn't get on the boat, and so they must have been wicked at some point.
You're right. But the boat hadn't happened yet. Because
They died before the
I
ark.
think they died before,
Well,
yeah,
it
they
shows
died,
that,
either died at the deluge or they died just before. Because
Right.
the deluge is the darker black line up and down.
right, this line here.
No, is these the extras? Yeah, we'll bring the extras back next week. Cause I asked Jim if he wanted them, cause I took a picture and sent it to him, and he said yes. Why don't we close with the Lord's Prayer?
It looks like Methuselah and Lamech, or however you say it, were alive at the deluge, and something happened and they didn't get on the ark. Because their life ends right there
Right
at the
there.
deluge.
So maybe they weren't as, it doesn't say they were godly.
It doesn't.
It
You
only
don't
talked
know.
about Enoch and Noah. It's the only two
There were lots of people that died at the flood, so.
so. Our Father,
Who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
thy kingdom come, Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Push
Want to
that
stop that
off.
video, Jane?